Welcome, good morning, or good afternoon for some of you. The Anxiety Crusher series. Now, this is the transformation, 7-step reset transformation model applied to stop the anxiety spiral before it starts. I mentioned earlier that there are similarities between what has to happen for transformation and what has to happen for to stop that anxiety spiral. So they're both involving, and again, this is not mental health. So in the context that I'm talking about it, they're both involving impulses going through the neurons. And we know that neurons that fire together wire together. And when you see somebody getting triggered, what you're seeing is a rapid set of associations happening in those neural pathways. So first of all, a quick setup so that we're all on the same page. So this model comes out of or supports my the seven performance series. Seven performance series are mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, relationship, professional, and financial. And what we have here is the left side. This is our agency. This is what we control. We are in charge of the mental, physical, spiritual. 100%. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. When I talk about spiritual, I'm talking about our higher self. I'm talking about our awareness of awareness. I'm talking about that awareness that we have when we're doing something that we said we weren't going to do anymore and we're choosing to do it anyway. And whether or not we choose to be aware, that's all in our control. Emotional is in our control as well, but especially since I'm talking about crushing anxiety, I would say many people would probably argue that emotional is not in their control, and that's because their buttons can get pushed and they don't control where or when that button push is going to come. Now, when you step back and you look at what's actually going on, first of all, they are in control of their emotions, but they've abdicated that control. They've abdicated it to where they can be triggered by external influences. And that ties right into what we're talking about today, which is mindset and priming. But when you don't have a handle on the emotional, it's not just the fact that you can have buttons pushed, it's that you can live in fear that you'll be faced with something that you can't overcome. This stops a lot of people from pursuing their goals, pursuing their purpose. They've been disappointed before and they don't want to get disappointed again. But there's a lot that gets packed into here. Meaning, for example, you have some A students who they spent years just making sure they never fell below a 4.0. That became their whole thing. And in the 20s, that's your prefrontal cortex being formed. That's their model of the world, that they can never, ever get below an A, or it's the end of the world for them. You can see how trial and error can be a problem. You can see how taking risks can be a problem. And in business, especially now with things happening so quickly, you have to test. We are no longer in a space where you can spend enough time on the design and the build and the testing in a sterile environment and knowing what you're going to get when you put it out in the real world. Like Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. I like to say, no plan survives contact with reality. And that's true today more than ever. And because when you look at technology and you go back to Moore's Law in 1970 time frame, that technology would double every 18 months, technology capability, you can understand the exponentiality of that and how we are on the very, very vertical part of that curve. So it's not going back. I just saw today that they just came out with another artificial intelligence that was less than $5 million to build. Now consider the hundreds of millions of dollars that was spent on open AI just a few years ago. And now we have competing tools that are as effective for less than $5 million. It's not going. The toothpaste is not going back in the tube. It's there. So we have to govern ourselves in such a way that this is the new normal. It's going to keep changing and changing. And so what we have to do is learn to operate by what I call principles and not be swayed every which way. One of the challenges that we face is that artificial intelligence has learned how to create great copy. So you're being hit with ad headlines, different headlines constantly. We're being bombarded. And then on top of that, in the US, you have the political space advertising on social media, and they don't really have an ROI to meet. They can spend millions of dollars. They can spend as much money as they can raise. They can spend it on ads. And if you advertise on social media, you'll notice that in the election years, especially presidential, the ad results and the costs, they get skewed pretty badly because there's so much money being thrown at advertising and there's no ROI requirement. At least with business, if you're not getting a return, you're not going to keep doing running that ad. But in politics, it doesn't matter. You can just run it forever and run as much as you want to make your point. I saw, what was it, 2 years ago, that a local race, which usually is under $1 million total spend, and someone backed one of the candidates to unseat the other and spent $16 million on a local race. That's 16x. And where does that money go? It goes into advertising, promotion, etc. So today, what we're talking about is two very important drivers of the first step. So that first step is beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, mindset, physiology. And I said last time that all of them are important. It's hard to say one is more important than the other. I am doing a model that I'll cover on Friday that shows how each one impacts the other, because you can enter that diamond anywhere, and I'll show that diamond. Well, think of a diamond where you have beliefs, beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming at the bottom, mindset, and then physiology in the middle. And you can enter that anywhere, and they all impact the other. Then we have on the right side relationship, professional and financial. And I say that the emotional is the gateway to the right side. You can do everything right here, but if you get hijacked, and we know how it's like trust is built on the escalator going up, but you can lose it like jumping out the window going down, because you can lose it in an instant and it takes a while to build. And if you're easily hijacked, you can do everything right, but still you put your outcomes at risk because you don't have the ability to regulate. And my whole model is to prevent. Prevention is the main thing, and the main thing is keeping the main thing the main thing. And when you're using prevention, you will find that you have fewer and fewer and fewer situations where you have to regulate. So the next part of this is that I talk a lot about the 33,000 decisions per day. So this is simulating a stimulus response cycle where you have a pre-stimulus phase, and that's where we are, steps 1 and 2. 1 is the one with the 5 drivers I just mentioned: beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, mindset, physiology. Step 2 is your state and the check-in, and state 2 is think of this as presence. So we go through the personal development. That personal development allows us to have a presence, and that presence can be upgraded over time. We want to make sure we're in a good state, and that state is one that we've trained and conditioned. But if you get knocked for a loop early in the day, we have to have ways to get back to that presence in a short period of time and live that presence for the day. And you can come back later on and work out the details of whatever you have to work out. But you have to get back to that presence because another stimulus is coming. And if you don't get back to this presence, then we're into that downward spiral kind of thing. And then we have steps 4, 5, 6, well, I'll cover in a minute. So we have the response, and part of that response is to get back to a mindful state. And that mindful state is what's going to enable us to have that good presence here. So that's that loop that we're going to keep making over and over and over. And while the number of decisions we make per day is 33,000, those are stimulus response cycles because it's habitual, right? 95% of our lives are run by habit. So you can see that it's mostly by habit. But there's actually, if you look at the micro stimulus response cycles, you're probably into the 100,000 plus. because you can have multiple micro stimulus response cycles in a second. We're awake about 65,000 seconds a day, so that 33,000, you're looking at about every other second you're getting a stimulus response cycle. Now, after the conditioned reaction, we want to make sure there's separation between the reaction and the response. We do not want the response to equal the reaction. This is when you see somebody getting triggered and they're cycling up very quickly. You can see that what's happening is their reaction is equaling the response. We're going to get into that today because it has to do with where their mindset is and then their priming. And then once they lose the narrative, once they lose the initiative, the narrative, different ways of saying it, then I say they're cooked, because it's very difficult unless you have the skills to come out of that. So we need tools to prevent. We need tools to stop it early, and we need tools if we find ourselves in there. Now, I'll tell you this, in working with clients, I would say, and it's 90 days, it's a 90-day transformation, that in the beginning, they can get knocked for a loop and go down that rabbit hole for a while, that spiral. They'll be able to pull back, but initially, it takes some work. You'll get to the point where you'll never even drop into that. And this is special ops. You watch Navy SEALs, Rangers, Marines. In fact, they talk about Marines run towards the fire, right? You're trained to do that. It's not that you're trained to run towards the fire, it's that the fight or flight mechanism is changed. We know that we're not going to run in, most of us are not going to run into a tiger. So having a threat response equal to a tiger, a fight or flight response equal to a tiger, just doesn't make sense. So we change that, and that's what we do here. And so you have the pause for the response, so it's different. If you do happen to be getting triggered, then we put in a step for emotional modulation so that we get back to an even keel. And this is 0 to 90 seconds. So this whole thing is taking less than a second, typically. But if you have to do emotional modulation, then you're going to add some more seconds to that, up to 90 seconds, to let the emotion process through, and there's a way to do that. We'll talk about that when we get to that step 5. Then you take your action, and then it's back to the mindfulness. And the next phase of these talks, when I get into leading, which I call one-to-one, even though you might be leading 8 people, that leadership at the frontline level is a one-to-one experience. Even at the executive level, it's a one-to-one experience. The difference is that at the executive level, your decisions have much more reach much farther, because you have the levels, the layers, and so you've got to be more thoughtful. But for leaders, we focus on the 7-1-2. We get back to a mindful state, because there's always action, there's always stimulus, there's always responses, there's always things happening. So that 3, 4, 5, 6 is ongoing. You're kind of done by the time the day starts. That 3, 4, 5, 6 is in place, right? What you want to do is constantly be living in the 7-1-2, and this is why we can focus on prevention. Now, in talking about priming last week, I talked a lot about why priming is so important, but I didn't give you ways to prime yourself. We touched on it, but that's what I'm going to do today, give you ways to prime yourself, so things that you can do. I'm also going to talk about mindset and introduce how those two things come into play. But what I want to do first is create this image, or this illustration. So I draw this a lot, and I talk about, people are moving along in the zone, going up and down in the zone. And the idea is that we actually want to break out in transformation work. We want to break out, and instead of being bounded by our habits, we're going to be bounded by principles. But that's not what we're talking about right now. We're talking about the anxiety piece. So the reason I draw this here is this little part here. We have our comfort zone, and all between the blue and the two blue lines, it's all comfort zone. But this is where we spend most of our time. And when we find ourselves getting up into this space, we start to get a little stressful. Now, this is very fractal. It happens on the micro level, it happens on the macro level. You know, you're late one day to work, and you might make an adjustment for the next day on the micro level. In a different situation, maybe you had some mistakes on some reports over a 3 or 4 week period of time. You buckle down and you tighten up. So this happens on the micro level, it happens on the macro level. With anxiety, it's different. It still happens that way. But when I talk about the transformation, there's a barrier here. And this barrier is where the cognitive dissonance happens, because we have stories, we have beliefs, we have habits. That's why we have these in step 1. We have anchors, self-talk, all of this stuff is there. So you may decide that you want to transform and make this inflection, but you have to work your way through all of this stuff. And this is messy. You get the cognitive dissonance because you're doing something that you said you would never do. You can't have a breakthrough without a break from the past. Every breakthrough is preceded by confusion, and that's all that cognitive dissonance. So while this is the difficult thing when you're going up, the difficult thing when you're below the line is your mindset takes a hit. Your priming is wrong. Your self-talk is suboptimal. Your visualization and this is a big one, because worry is like negative goal setting. Most people would agree that when you make pictures, when you visualize, you can bring that thing about. Now, this is not manifestation. I don't do any woo-woo. Everything is real practical and stuff that you can go test yourself. But that said, visualization does 2 or 3 things. One is it primes you, and so it aligns. It also communicates to the reticular activating system that this thing is important and that's the outcome you want. And visualization actually can activate neural pathways. By visualizing and doing it in a certain kind of way, you can activate neural pathways to where they've even seen muscularity changes in piano players when they were using visualization. And this is why racers, ski racers, all kinds of racers will visualize. They spend time visualizing, and you'll even see their bodies moving a little bit. And in racing, you want your visualization to match the lap times. And that's that deep practice. So you're so deep into it and you're focused. And when you're doing that, you're actually activating the neural pathways. In motorcycle training, you can practice mentally what to do in situations where there's cross-traffic incidents happen, and you'll do the thing that you've practiced doing even though you never practiced it in real life, by practicing it, because what you're doing is setting up. So you end up creating implementation intentions that are wrong. Now all of these let me write this first. So all of these are actually 2 sides of the same coin, because they are empowerment catalysts, but when they act as resistance factors, they can be pretty powerful. So an implementation intention is, when this happens, I'm going to do that. When that happens, I'm going to do this. Now imagine a way to think about this. If you are, I'll tell you a story first. When I used to do a lot of sport touring motorcycle rides. So I would be gone for 3 or 4 days at a time, ride the twisties, and then go go back home. And because you're sometimes to get to the twisties, I was living in Chicago, I'd be on the highway for 12 hours to get to the twisties, some 8 to 12 hours, depending on how fast I was going. And in that time, you'll get flashes that'll come through your mind that something can happen. Everybody who rides a motorcycle accepts the fact that there's some danger, so they get these things will flash by. And what I would do instantly, as soon as that picture would come in, rather than try to suppress it or anything, I would just make a picture of me arriving at home with my kids, smiling and greeting me. So I would make that picture of pulling into the driveway on the motorcycle, and that's the picture that I would carry. And all that tension just goes away. So am I manifesting something? No. What I'm doing is I'm priming myself for the outcome that I want. Now, that said, here's an example where this could come into play. Let's say that wintertime is coming, you might be on an icy street. Let's say you're on an icy street. Most people, without thinking about it, can possibly have a picture of themselves falling. The risk of doing that, two things. One is you'll probably tighten up. If you start to slip, you'll probably tighten up, which makes it less likely you'll recover. And the other thing that happens is you shut off avenues for new information. So for example, if I'm walking on ice and I know I could slip, the thing I want to be visualizing is I want to collapse my knees right away. If I start to fall, I want to drop my knees because that'll lower my center of gravity. And by having that picture, you're more likely to recover without having to fall. If you're uptight and you're stressed and your breathing is high, your center of gravity is high, and you start to slip, it's a freak out moment. So that's just one example. So here's the point. Worry is negative goal setting. You can't worry about something without also making a picture. This is why we tell in sports, you never say something like, whatever you do, don't give it to them low in the outside. You say, give it to them high inside. Make sure your pitch is biased towards high in the inside. Apply that to everything you do in business. You don't want to tell somebody, don't get nervous when they're going up to speak, or don't mess this one up. You don't want to give them that picture. The subconscious will turn, aka network of neurons, will turn words into pictures, and then those pictures become something that we gravitate towards, because the subconscious doesn't know the difference between what you want and what's just a set of associations. They're all just associations. You can actually turn implementation intentions against you. And this is you doing it. It's not somebody from the outside. It's you making the choice. So the challenge here is that this area makes it very difficult to climb out of it. When you fall into that anxiety spiral, this all makes it difficult because we're working on, you're making pictures of what you don't want, not because you want to, but because you're worried, and you make the picture of yourself falling instead of stooping down in the ice example. Or if you're driving on a road that you don't know or that you're not familiar with, you don't want to have a picture of you having an accident. This is obvious, right? But people do it. They don't realize it. Or if you're going up to speak, you don't want to make a picture of yourself freezing. It happens, right? And we want to make the positive pictures, but when you're down in this area, this is why I say prevention is so important. You can get out of this if you have the skills and you see it coming. There's things you can do to get out of here, but it's much easier to prevent it. So I would say this going through here is difficult because of the stories we told ourselves and the cognitive dissonance that happens. Coming out from the anxiety spiral from below this area is difficult because the deck is stacked against us. So if somebody's talking about leaving their job to start a business, most of your people who have experience will tell you, get your income up first. First, make sure you proof your concept, get the income first before you leave. You don't want to just leave. Some people thrive on that kind of pressure, but you don't know, if you've never been in that pressure, you don't know what you're going to get. So you want to protect yourself from that. That's prevention. Once you know what you're going to get and how you respond, then there's different things that we can do. So this is why in priming and mindset is so important. And what's happening in priming and mindset? This is the drawing I left off with on Friday. And if I make this into two parts, this is the conditioned reaction step. Conditioned reaction. And it's 250 milliseconds before we even know what's going on. And it's 250 milliseconds of processing. And then you have the handoff, but there's a wait of 250. And I'm generalizing here, but that wait is because the conscious mind back to the seven-step reset illustration, you have this step 3 is the conditioned reaction. That's what I just drew. And this is happening very, very fast because the subconscious, aka network of neurons, processes at 11 million bits per second. And the conscious mind only processes at 50 bits per second. And so what this pause, we want to leverage that pause to not just get the handoff. If you don't do anything at all, you're just going to have more neurons piling on, right? The neurons that wire together, fire together, and ones that fire together, wire together. So you just have more and more neurons piling on. And if it's a threat, this can be overwhelming for a person right in here. And that's this 250 milliseconds. We'll deal with this later when we get in, or next time when we after we get through step 2 and step 3. And by the time I get to step 3, I will have covered most of it because it's so important here. But in this area right here, this is where priming happens. Cognitive biases, threat detection, and there's more. But if you think about somebody who has a phobia, that's going to happen here. The subconscious hasn't even started processing yet in a way that's actionable. This is just like, is it a threat? Am I ashamed of this? This is where self-talk can really mess you up. And the manifestation crowd, they talk a lot about the self-talk and the belief and the visualization, and you can see in here, I don't bring any of that in. None of that is necessary for you to do the things I'm talking about. But you can see how if your self-talk is already degrading or catastrophizing, this is going to pick up on that, and it's going to put you in a threat situation, a fight or flight. What's worse is that we have this already listening out here. So even before the stimulus occurs, there's this constant monitoring. It's like priming. I use the example of those recorders, video or audio recorders that are already listening. So when you push the record button, it pulls in the prior 2 seconds. That's sort of like what's happening here. So if you're already in a compromised state, in the present state, step 2, if your presence is already compromised or you're already defeated, then you've already set yourself up here, and then the behavior comes, and it's triggered kind of behavior, hijacked kind of behavior, and this is why it seems like habits are impossible to change. They're not impossible to change. What we have to do is deal with them here. We Priming is getting you set. Mindset is meaning. So we're talking about mindset today, but I wanted to bring back the priming because it's such an important point of this. And what we can do here is we can use visualization, transformational vocabulary, affirmations, and there's a, it's funny, affirmations in the 70s and 80s, they seem to have worked better. Now there's people who are hating on them a bit. I think the issue is that things have gotten so fast and people are spending more time, like this picture I was talking about. When you're down here, affirmations are going to be hard to see work because all of this other stuff is overpowering them. If you're in here, affirmations will have more effectiveness and they'll help you get through this too. But if you're trying to climb out of a hole, affirmations are probably not going to help you much because it's too obvious that it's not true and your experience that's going on is just not there. So transformational vocabulary, I may have said earlier, I did, yeah. So in sales, you might say instead of I feel rejected, you might say, oh, they just didn't appreciate the offer. Rejection is a charged word; it has a lot of power, and so rather than say rejection, no, they just didn't appreciate it. I've swapped out overwhelm to just time to rechunk. So the conscious mind can hold 7 to 9 chunks of information at a time. That's why everything I do is sevens. That's why phone numbers in the U.S. are sevens. We used to have to remember our phone number because you didn't have it in a smartphone. So I've replaced the word overwhelm with time to rechunk. So that feeling that used to be described as overwhelm, it's just time to rechunk. I removed embarrassment from my vocabulary as it relates to me. Instead of embarrassment, that was amusing, that was interesting. Why have words that have all that emotional charge? So you can use transformational vocabulary, and you can do that in here. Visualization, breathing is a big one, and there's all sorts of breathing. There's a whole books. I mean, Wim Hof method is one, but long, deep breaths are what you want. It's interesting. Shallow breaths can create anxiety. Anxiety causes shallow breaths. So these neurons that fire together and wire together, they go both ways. And this breathing, I like to breathe down into my lower abdomen. This is the key, right? Or chi in martial arts. This is the way you breathe. And because I do that every morning, I do a breathing ritual every morning, I'm constantly anchoring myself. And that's the other one we have is anchors. Constantly anchoring myself so that I can get back to that present state that I was talking about. If I get thrown off course, if I'm speaking in front of a group, I get thrown off course, I may turn around, and you're not supposed to turn your back to an audience, but it's a good cause. I'll turn around and go, yes. And I'll get that, that's my anchor. It's an anchor that I use when I'm speaking. So I never have to worry about like, oh my gosh, I'm spiraling. It's what I'm going to do. So breathing, anchors, and they go together. And the more you can prevent, the more the less you need to do these things. And I always keep mentioning how this is so fractal. This happens in the seconds. It happens in the minutes. I'm carrying pictures around of what I want for the day. I'm carrying pictures around what I want for the week. I'm carrying pictures around what I want for the year. All of this, visualization, transformational vocabulary, even the affirmations, the breathing is, yeah, so I have longer breathing patterns, but if I'm in a moment of what would have been a threat, I have different breathing for that, different anchors. And we talk about the positivity exercise. The positivity exercise works out here. because the positivity exercise, it has the effect of telling your system, your nervous system, that the threshold for a threat is really, really high. Left on its own, let's say this is your range. Left on its own, I'll draw it here. Left on its own, that's your range. The threat, anything above this, is a threat. So what we do with the positivity exercise, which takes about 6 weeks, is that we change that and make the threshold for a threat really high. So most of the stimuli that you're going to come across are just going to be neutral. And that's something that you train. This is not knowledge, it's not positive mental attitude, it's not priming. You're literally training your subconscious the same way it was trained from 0 to 7, the same way, I should say programmed, right? The same way it was programmed from 0 to 7, the same way it was programmed in the teens, the same way it locked in the model of the world from age 19 to 27 with the prefrontal cortex and the additional 20 billion neurons. It's the same process that we're using. That's why I call it a reset. We're resetting our mechanism that causes the conditioning. So you're doing two things. There's the conditioning that's changing, but also the mechanism that sets the conditioning. And this is why we're able to do the presence at step 2, and that's why it's so important, because now we don't live on the Serengeti. The hunter-gatherer lifestyle of the last 10,000 years was most of it. 9,500 years were similar to hunter-gatherer. It's just the last 500 years, and only the last 50 or so that, not even 50, 25, that computers were in most households. I would say 30 or 40 years, computers were in most households. So we are resetting, and this is I don't think there's any book that I read that talks about this priming step happening before the stimulus. This is huge. And it shows you why steps 1 and 2 are so important. And then I don't think that there's any books that I've read, I'm not saying it's not out there, but I haven't read a book that talks about how this space is something's actually going on. We know that once you get in here, you have associations. We know that that's where the habits reside. This is where the neurons are firing and wiring together. But there's this whole preamble thing happening. And because we process it, the network of neurons processes 2 million bits per second, there's a lot that happens in here. Now, you can still work the visualization and the transformation and all that, but this is your priming and your mindset. And remember, priming is the state. It's priming for the state that you want to be in. Because remember, we talked about how easily you are primed, and we said that priming is a sequence. So cognitive biases may be more powerful than priming, but we respond to what comes first. And because the priming comes out here, that comes first, and that comes with the difficulties with the cognitive biases, the threat detection. You know, if you ever, growing up in New York City and then being trained as a ranger, motorcycle racing, track days in the car, teaching drivers to drive on the track, you see a lot. And you're seeing a lot happening in neuroscience because people in these environments that I'm talking about are often facing fight or flight. And there's a bully thing that happens when bullies are interacting with somebody. If you've ever seen, watch a bully, they're looking for that cue that says the person feels defeated. Once that person goes into that defeat mode, the bully will step up the game. If the person does not go into that defeated mode, you'll see man, I was just kidding, man. No, we're just joking. Chill out, man. The bully backs off. And this is happening in micro time. It's happening here. It's the flinch. Now, by focusing on prevention instead of a threat, and this is real. If you talk to anybody who's trained in special ops, you talk to martial arts masters, people who've achieved brown or black belt in martial arts, people who've fought in tournaments, MMA fighters for sure, they will tell you that they don't think in fight or flight. They think in focus or engage. And that's a big, big difference. So this is why if you're walking with somebody, you see those videos where the bush, a guy's like dressed up like a bush, and they jump out, and people go fall. I mean, people fall. They do this hop thing, and it's that startle reflex. It's happening here. That is happening right here because it happens so quick. And then by the time their conscious comes on, it takes a while to catch up because the startle reflex already took them over there. And remember, that's energy. Energy is moving through the neural pathways. You have to kind of reverse that and bring it back. When you watch a special ops person walk past that bush, they'll look. That's the first thing they do is they look at it, and that's focus. And the next thing is, do I engage? And this is the example I'm using why they say Marines and special ops, they run towards the gunfire. Because you want the initiative. You want to maintain the initiative. I'm not saying that's always the reason, but you definitely want to be in attack mode. You don't want to be on your heels. And by having presence in step 2, which is what we'll be talking about once I finish with the step 1, presence is the day-to-day, getting back there, the check-in, the dashboard. How am I doing? How's my self-talk? What's my mental state? What's my physical state? What's my spiritual state, my higher self? What's my emotional state? And physiology is a big one. Is my physiology one of courage or is it one of defeat? And sometimes you need to check that right away and get it back on track. This is why the leaders are going to live in 712, 712. 712. So step 1 is where we're going to train that presence. Step 2 is where we get back to that presence. And when we're talking about the 7-step reset at the individual level, we're using the beliefs. And when I talk about beliefs, you can go back and watch that video. It's about uncovering the limiting beliefs and neutralizing them. When we talk about neuroplasticity, it's command of habits. And I talk about it being fractal. So we want to set the larger scale habits, and we need to set the smaller scale habits. And last time on Friday, I gave you some ways that you can actually change your conditioning, which happens in here. So we did talk about what you can do in here. I said swish pattern is one. You can use reframing. You can use dissociation. There's different things you can do once you're inside here, but if it's significant and you find yourself down here, a lot of that won't work because there's too much momentum pushing you, and you want to prevent. There's no reason to be here. Now let me give you why I'm doing this every single day. I do this every day because what I have found is that people, they think they know this. And I'm not throwing stones, but they think they know this. But when you listen to them, you recognize that they have a gap. There's a wall. And that wall is saying, I can't change my habits. I am stuck with who I am. There is no hope. And although on the other side, they feel like they have a growth mindset. And by the way, when you step back and think about what I'm saying here, yes, a person could have a growth mindset, but if their meaning in the moment is that of defeat, it doesn't matter. Their mindset becomes fixed. That's why I talk about we have to be able to get from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset instantaneously, and better yet, we have to prevent ourselves from ever falling into a fixed mindset. But everyone has heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And we know that the first level, second, 1, 2, 3. So we have physiological needs. We have safety and shelter, security. We have esteem. We have love. We have esteem. And we have self-actualization. Now, because I was doing Neuralink, neurolinguistic programming certifications in the early 90s. And then I did the neural change training. And I've been in other curriculums like that. I've often been surrounded by psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, therapists, etc., because that's who's going to the training. They have to get the continuing education. I was often with them. And what surprised me one day was I was talking about, oh yeah, I just changed the rules. And they said, and the response was, well, how do you do that? And I wish I could do that. And I said, wait a minute, I went there from the business standpoint. I tested stuff in sales. I've had the good fortune of building 7 different high performing teams over a 15-year period. So I had the opportunity to test a lot of this stuff, discard what doesn't work and keep what does. And my model for Maslow's hierarchy of needs is this is relative. It's not an actual absolute. It is relative. If I pick somebody up and I drop them on a deserted island, everything that they've had, forget it, it's gone. They're going to go right back here, work on their physiological needs. Once they get some food, then they're going to go into their safety needs, get some shelter built, and then the love needs. If there's no one else on the island, they're going to take care of the animals, because taking care of the animals, taking care of their plants that they're going to use to eat, that releases oxytocin. The love need is getting met. The esteem need, they just have to, the definition of success is the progressive realization of predetermined worthwhile personal goals. So they get their esteem from that, and they're living in self-actualization. So I made the point, yeah, you just change your rules. You set the rules for what your physiological needs are. You can go 30, 40, 50 days without food. You can go 3 or 4 days without water. You can go months without exercise, right? So you set what your physiological emergency point is. So essentially, there's no reason for most people to be walking around with needs unmet. You can decide that you want to love yourself and release oxytocin. You can have gratitude and release oxytocin. You can take care of your plants and release oxytocin. So you don't, and then as far as esteem, when I first started this, I said, well, esteem is like recognition. And a lot of times in sales, it's who does the best. It's a ranking, and you can't always control if you're going to be recognized or not. Now there are other awards that are set based on a level, hitting a number, but there's things that are out of your control. So I said, I'm not going to wait until I hit these awards and certifications. I'm going to self-actualize now, because when I look in the mirror in the morning, I literally used to say this, I recognize myself. There I am, I recognize myself. My esteem need is met, the love need is met, the safety need is met, the physiology need is met, or physiological. So this is how you can start to think, and you talk about being fractal, right? This is my bigger model. So no matter what happens, if I'm alive, I'm going right back to work on the physiological needs, and then the safety needs, and then the love needs, and the esteem needs. I'm going to be back to self-actualization within a very short period of time, because there's no absolute number that says those things are met. So we have priming and mindset. Priming is getting you to that state that you want to be in. It's setting the frame. Mindset is the meaning. So when we talk about this first 250 milliseconds, priming is happening here in the already listening, and it's also happening here. But the meaning, if I tell you I'm going to show you, you have a phobia of spiders, and I tell you I'm going to bring out a plastic spider, it has meaning. So you say, okay, it may not even bother you, right? And because you have the meaning. But if I threw the plastic spider at you, the meaning is that it's real. So meaning is happening here. And you want to be in control of that. And the way you're in control of that is by having the presence, and then also having an identity. And that's the thing where priming is identity. You're priming an identity that says, I will prevail. When you have that kind of identity, that leads to the not fight or flight, but focus or engage. Because your identity is such that I will prevail. And this is aligned with the Stockdale paradox. Yes, it's tough. Yes, it's hard. I will prevail. Yes, it's hard. It's going to take a long time. I'll prevail. This is why you can go through trial and error and not get bent out of shape that you had 5 or 6 or 7 setbacks in a row. That's just 5 more ways it didn't work. You know that. But what we have to do is let go of this perfection thing that says if you didn't get it right, you're less. That means you're less than you thought you were. No, you have to have an identity that says I will prevail. It doesn't matter what you run into. You know you'll prevail. Even when it's hard, you'll prevail. And the moment you don't, you're gone and you won't notice it anyway. So these are you have to come up with your own way of thinking about it. And I've been working on this stuff for decades. So it's like I've got tapes already laid out that in my head that work. But if you doubt it, just think about the martial artists, and on TV, right? The Rangers on TV, Special Forces. Think about that and then work towards that with your 7-step reset. And I'm telling you that was the model that I was using because I know placebos work and I didn't want a model that required belief. You have to have enough belief. And the other thing is placebos need a good environment, just like a lot of this stuff I'm talking about. You have to be calm. I didn't want to rely on a calm state. I've tried that, and what happens is when you get knocked off course, you don't have the ability to recover because you're knocked off course, and you're not calm anymore. So I needed something that worked no matter what. If I'm already triggered, I want it to work. If my belief is down or my energy level is down, I want it to work. And that's what we have here. So we have ways of making this work in the micro, at the macro, and getting back there very quickly, which we'll talk about more in step 2. But I still, next time, so tomorrow I'll talk about physiology. And then on Friday, I'll spend more time talking about physiology because I'm going to be shut down on Wednesday and Thursday because I'm traveling and Thanksgiving. But Friday, I should be able to get on and talk about physiology some more because I want to wrap that up. But tomorrow, 8 o'clock, we'll talk about physiology. And see you then. Take care.